Hey everyone, it's Holly Marie King, and we are back with Not a Dream. It's actually the final chapter, so I'm kind of stoked. And I didn't think it was going to take this long. It's only 24 chapters. It should have only took, like a couple months maybe. Took a lot longer than I thought. Well, that's life for you. But yeah, kind of excited to get into Emblem Knights though, because Emblem Knights actually is like 3 times better than the story, so I'm really excited for story number 2. However, I am thinking about incorporating my husband, because he does actually really cool voices, and I think it'd be a lot of fun to have him read parts in the book, and probably a lot more fun for you guys to listen. Maybe. I mean, honestly, I just share this mostly because I enjoy my books and I think my mistakes are funny, so I share my rough drafts so you can see how terrible of a writer I am when I'm just, writing for fun, and then how much better it gets, and then maybe people like it more. But I don't know, I just did this mostly for the fun of it. But yeah, it's been quite a journey reading this series. I guess it's a series since I did 24 episodes of it, but yeah, I guess we'll get started and then we'll talk a little bit more at the end. But yeah, here we go, the final chapter. Chapter 24, the end of the prophecy. Helen sat in her cell with her head up against the stone wall. She was thinking about things that had nothing to do with their predicament. Allison had been sitting with her eyes closed across from Helen. Her eyes suddenly popped open and she sat up. "Helen," she whispered. Helen didn't answer. She was still in her own little world. Allison moved forward and quietly crawled over to Helen. "Look at me," she said in Helen's ear. "Huh?" Helen looked over, not realizing she had been spacing out. "Someone's coming," and Ellen disappeared. Allison said. She looked behind her through their prison bars. "Rosie is aware of them also, but she isn't saying anything to Ellen, or she doesn't seem to know. I'm not sure." "She's not going to stop us from completing our task," Helen told Allison with little emotion. "What are you talking about?" Allison asked. She searched Helen's eyes, but she looked completely sane. "I told Ellen to stay close to Troy so that she can kill him before he changes completely into human," Helen explained. She looked back up at the dark ceiling of the cave. "If he survives the change, then he'll find a way to change everything back. I mean, until the thing that started all this is destroyed, there still might be a chance of it happening again. But if Troy were to survive, it wouldn't take him long at all." "What are you babbling about?" Allison asked. She understood that Troy had to die, but why would there still be a chance for the world to change again? Helen slowly closed her eyes and opened them again. "It would take years for the evil being to find someone, and then even longer to convince them to do this to the world again," she answered tiredly. "But you would save us again, right?" Allison said with a smile. Helen chuckled. "It would be so far from now that I would already be dead." She looked over to the doors, making Allison follow her gaze. "Hello, Brandon. I was wondering what was taking you so long." "When did you meet him?" Allison asked, looking from girl to boy. "We've never met. We are the ones that can now see the end of the prophecy," the boy answered. "He was a tiny child who looked to be about 5. He had brown hair and sapphire blue eyes. We don't know what will happen after all is said and done, but who would want to know their entire future?" Helen said with a crooked smile. She stood as Reggie opened the door to the cell. I think that's Reggie. Reggie's the old man. I think it's supposed to be Brandon. The 2 girls quickly stepped out of their cell and followed Brandon through the dark cave until he stopped. "This isn't the way out." "Why are we stopped?" Allison asked anxiously. "This is where it all ends," Helen whispered, falling to her knees, her hand touching the wall of the cave. She began to shake uncontrollably. Brandon put his hand on Helen's shoulder and squatted down next to her. "Do you think it is time for the prophecy to finally end? We've been waiting for so long." Helen looked at the boy with tears in her eyes. "I'm so scared," she whispered. Brandon wiped the tears away from the girl's eyes. "If I don't say the words, the prophecy will never be fulfilled. There's still time." Helen shook her head. "We must finish this tonight," she told him. "As if we don't, Troy will stop us." You go through with this, then she will die. Troy came through the passage they entered from. He had a knife up against Ellen's throat. Helen stood, brushing off her knees. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She needed a moment to bring herself back together. When she opened her eyes again, she turned to face Troy with a defiant look in her eyes. Finish the prophecy, she told Brandon. The boy stood beside the girl inches from her. I told you not to cross me, human, Troy said, bringing the knife closer to Ellen's throat, in order for the spirits to be separated into their own bodies. Brandon paused, watching all the eyes in the room on him, except for Helen's. She was looking into Ellen's eyes, keeping her calm. The chosen one must sacrifice her life for the rest. That's absurd, Reggie said angrily. Was Reggie with them? I'm so lost. It can't be true, Allison gasped, putting her hand to her mouth. She now understood why Helen didn't want to fully explain why she had to leave the others behind. But it just couldn't be true. Why would she have to die? Do you remember when I asked you about the dream that I had? Helen asked Allison. She was still staring into Ellen's eyes. Yes, the spirit said to her, nodding with her hand still on her mouth. She remembered the conversation right before the people from the fog had attacked. I had dreamt that we were standing here in this place, and that I heard the end of the prophecy. She turned towards the cave wall, touching its cold surface, and that I went in through this wall, not coming out again. Troy laughed at this. You don't have the courage for such a thing, human, he sneered. Helen fixed him with her defiant look again. Finish it, she said calmly, not looking away. If the chosen one chooses not to finish their given duty, with the ones that had spoken the prophecy out loud are all together and the portal is open. Again he paused, but this time he almost didn't continue. He looked up at the girl that stood bravely. He could see her arms and legs shaking, but her eyes were fixed and her jaw was set. Nothing would stop her. Then the cursed souls throughout this entire world will die. He fell silent. Nothing happened for some time. No one knew how long they stood there for, but Helen knew she must speak. But she was struggling with her emotions. One life for so very many lives seems fair to me, she finally croaked out. She couldn't stop the tears as they spilled over and ran down her cheeks. The cave was dark enough that no one could see them. Not if that life has no experience in this world, Reggie argued. Right, Natalie? He asked his wife, Natalie? The spirits have already been taken the process of death starts first, and then the mythical creatures will be taken. She must finish the prophecy before you are taken, Brandon explained. Allison is still here because she is the one that started it all. You make it sound like this is an easy decision, that her life means nothing, Allison cried. She was still holding her hand over her mouth. Oh, but my life is so very important, and I am ready to fulfill the prophecy. The portal opened behind Helen. The group was almost caught up to them. She tried to smile at Allison. It was barely visible in the darkness. Brandon grabbed her hand, holding on tightly. Didn't you hear how important my life is? If I go through with this, then everyone else will be able to live a long and happy life together. John and Burke will live through this ordeal, she said before anyone else could speak. She knelt down so she could look Brandon in the eye. This was not your fault, she told the boy, ruffling his hair. I chose this path out of my own free will. Helen then stood and faced the portal. Everyone in the small room was frozen where they stood as they watched Helen walk through the entrance. Reggie was shaking with grief for such a young woman giving her life up. Allison had tears spilling down her cheeks and her hand still there over her mouth. She looked as though she would break apart. Troy stood with the knife still over Ellen's throat. He had a mixture of anger and shock on his face. Brandon held Helen's hand till it too went through the portal, not wanting to let her go. Then everything happened so fast. The rest of the group entered the room, only seeing Helen's hand fall through the portal. Ellen turned on Troy and slit the vampire's throat with a knife she had hidden by her side. She stepped back, waiting to see what happened. The portal closed, and most of the group started to call out to Helen. They wanted her to step out. Brennan was just looking at his hand, knowing he would never be able to hold her hand again. Allison fell to her knees in tears. She was the only spirit that had not been taken. Reggie put his hand to his heart, stepping back. Helen could hear their voices, but all she could see was white. There was nothing else around her. Time for your decision to be made, a voice spoke in the nothingness. It was strong and sure. I have decided. Helen breathed for what felt like the last time. She closed her eyes to feel her heart beating quickly in its last attempt to keep her body alive. I will give my life for all of the cursed. Is this your final choice? The voice asked. Helen thought about all the people she had met on this long journey, and she closed her eyes for the final time. I stand by my decision. Suddenly, the portal opened and a blinding light flashed before them all. The group covered their eyes and cowered away from it. Troy began to gasp for air as blood spewed from the open wound that had been inflicted by Ellen. The spirits began to emerge from the portal one by one, but they were human now. Then the portal exploded into a million sparkling lights, landed on the cursed, and turned them human. Everyone then realized that they were free. They smiled at one another and hugged in happiness with tears in their eyes. It had been so long since they had felt like they were free. "Wait," Ellen cried out, getting everyone to look at her. "Where's Helen?" "The Chosen One has decided," a voice said deep and loud. They spoke from the place where the portal had appeared. John stood apart from everyone. He hadn't moved since they had entered the space. He didn't understand that she was gone, and that it was far too late to save her. What had she decided? Ellen stepped forward with blood on her shirt front. She decided to die in order to save us all, was her answer. John took one look at the dagger in her hand and the blood on her shirt, and his anger peaked. He marched over to her with murder in his eyes and grabbed her shoulders, using what little control he had not to grip his hands around her throat. "You killed her, you bloody whore!" "No!" Ellen cried, trying to pull away, but his hands were clamped on her shoulders. He was far scarier than Troy had ever been at that moment. "John!" Allison grabbed his shoulder and tried to pull him back. Helen walked through the portal. Ellen killed Troy, because that is what Helen wanted her to do. The blood is Troy's. Allison's word finally got through his head, and he let Ellen go. His eyes were hollow. He looked as though death had claimed him too. John turned around and hugged Allison, crying for Helen. "How did we not know?" "She didn't want you to know," Brandon answered. "She wanted all of you to be happy, to be free, and she wanted to have laughter in her life for her final days, and she got as she wished." Everyone went silent, knowing they would never see Helen again. John wiped sweat from his brow as he worked in his smithy, trying to keep the sweat out of his eyes. "Do you need a towel?" Burke asked, holding up a towel in his hands. John shook his head, throwing himself into his work. It had been 4 years since the day Helen had died. He tried not to think about it, but that never helped. "I don't need it," he grunted, not turning to look at his brother. "John, you can't keep doing this to yourself." John didn't need to turn around to know his pregnant sister-in-law was standing behind him. "Need to get yourself a girl. I hear Son is still available." "Allison, he won't listen to you," Burke said with a grim smile on his face. "I hate to stop you from killing yourself, but the funeral is about to start," Allison said quietly, her hand subconsciously rubbing her big belly. John put his tools down and cut the fire off from the metal. He stepped over to Burke and took the towel he held to wipe his dirty face off. "Let's get this over with," he grumbled to himself. Allison sighed, resting her head on Burke's sturdy shoulder. "I wish there was something I could do for that poor boy," she said, still rubbing her bulging belly subconsciously. Burke had his arm around his wife. "He'll be okay. He just needs to find something to help her get over losing Helen." There it is. Allison looked at him with her big emerald eyes and took his hand. "Come on, we have to get to the funeral," she said quietly. John marched all the way to the cemetery with a set look on his face. He didn't even bother to change out of his blacksmith attire. He found where the funeral was being held and approached the group. They were there for Reggie. The old man had had a big heart. He had a fatal heart attack. Luckily, it went quick for him, but it was just another person to be taken from them. Everyone was there. Monica and Lando stood closely together, Lando holding the girl closely to him as she cried. The two had been married for about 2.5 years. They still had no children, except for the girl, Susie. She was 11 now and very much alive. She sat atop the bear with her mother's son. She hadn't known the old man well, and so she was there just to be there. Son, who preferred to be alone, was stroking her daughter's hair, trying to fight the sobs that were in her chest. Ron and Ellen stood apart from the group, knowing that Ellen was still considered a traitor by most of the group. They had a baby girl and another child on the way. The two had been married 2 weeks from the day that Helen had died. John despised Ellen more than anything. He hated that she had children more than anything else. Brandon and Carrie stood in front of their parents silently. The two kids were a strange pair, but they were treated as though every one of the older chosen were their aunts and uncles. Their parents held the shoulders of their children in comfort. They didn't socialize with the group, and wouldn't even make eye contact with most of them. The kitten had turned into a cat and was always following little Brandon around. Andrew held his wife Maria close to him. The two had twin boys that were going to be 4 very soon. They were the rowdiest children John had ever met. Andrew was crying like a baby compared to everyone else. His mother just stood beside him crying into her hands. John took all of this in and then walked over to the casket. "Goodbye, old friend," he murmured before walking off towards the caves. There had been so many people from the prophecy that the town, with which it had been fulfilled, was given to them. It was a gracious gift, but it was a constant reminder of what they had to lose in order to be free. John walked all the way to the spot where it had all happened. There were torches in the wall so that the portal entrance would be visible easier. He lit these and saw all the flowers at the foot of her grave. It was such a big tomb. John had to make sure he didn't step on Troy's bones. No one had cared enough to move him from the cave. And after 4 years, all he was bones and ripped clothes. John could care less and spared only a glance at the pathetic mess. He looked at the stone wall, where the prophecy had etched itself after it had been fulfilled, and the stone wall had made itself blank. It was also a constant reminder of what they had gone through. But it was so strange to see all the words together. It is said that the first person is a sword builder. The person you seek paints the horizon. This person plucks the chords of hope beautifully. Their generosity knows no bounds. They write the words of wisdom in one's mind. Kindness comes easy to their hearts. The world opens itself to them. They heal the wounds of many. She is a protector of the weak. Their choice could change lives. She must die in order to save them all. John reached over to touch the wall and traced the sentence that led Helen to him, the words that started the search. He regretted not telling her how important she was to him, that she had made him want to be a better person, more so than anything else ever had. The cave wall suddenly appeared to grow a hand that reached out and grabbed his wrist. John gasped and pulled himself back in surprise. The hand released him. As soon as the contact separated, the wall shone the bright color it had once before. The words disappeared on the wall, leaving nothingness on its surface. "Helen?" John asked uncertainly, but there was no answer. The end. I actually am editing the sequel to this book. It's a 3-part book, or a 3-part series, 3-part book. It's a 3-part series. Goes Not a Dream, Trouncing the Unknown, and what's the name of the third one? I'm writing the third one currently. Ending Tradition. Yes, that's what it is. But yeah, I'm actually hoping to get the second book in the series out this year. But yeah, it's called Trouncing the Unknown. I don't know if I should say. But basically, it's the sequel of what happens. Like, what happens after everything's done. God, I can't tell you too much or else it'll ruin some of it. Basically, we're gonna go on another adventure, and there's a little foreshadowing towards the end there. Helen said something about there being a main evil that has to be taken care of. That's why it's called Trouncing the Unknown, because we don't know who he is. But yeah, it's basically about going to go destroy him. There we go. That's all I can say without ruining the plot of the second book. But yeah, pretty excited. We finally finished Not a Dream. So fairly soon we'll start Emblem Knights, the final draft. We've already started the rough draft a while ago, but since I still had this one and the first book of the rough draft was way shorter than the final draft of this, obviously that's going to happen a lot, so there's going to be some overlapping with the rough drafts and the final drafts, but I'm really excited to read Emblem Knights because I love Emblem Knights, and I'm so excited. I know, I keep talking about it. But yeah, if you guys are interested in buying this book for your enjoyment to read whatever you want or not, that's fine. I will, like I always do, put in the description below where you can buy it if you want it. But yeah, I write my books for me more than anyone, and I don't mind sharing it either here or, on there. But yeah, I'm happy that I finally finished Not a Dream. It was my first book that I put out there. It's not the first book I ever wrote. I haven't even finished putting that. I mean, it's finished, it's just not finished being put into the computer. But essentially, I have to edit it and everything. But yeah, this is the first book I ever got published. So yeah, it's just surreal that it's over. Yay! But yeah, anyway, hopefully I will see you guys next time. Bye!